All right, so today we're deep diving into a couple articles from CBS News,
Mm-hmm.
and they're about President-elect Trump's plan for mass deportation
Yeah,
and all the talk about potentially using the military to carry it out.
right.
So this is obviously a really hot topic right now.
Definitely.
A lot of people are concerned about it.
Yeah, it's causing a lot of debate.
So we're going to try to break it all down,
Okay,
see if we can make sense of what's going on.
sounds good.
What's interesting is that this isn't really a new idea from Trump.
That's true.
He was talking about this stuff back in 2024.
Yeah, during the campaign, he made some similar promises.
Right, I remember that.
But now?
But it hits different now that he's actually president-elect.
Exactly. It's like
Do these articles mention how he's thinking about putting this plan into action?
they do.
Okay.
They mention that he's considering declaring a national emergency, which could give him the power to use the military.
A national emergency because of immigration.
Well, that's
I don't quite follow that.
yeah, that's one of the big questions, isn't it? What exactly makes this an emergency?
I mean, what's the emergency exactly?
Right. But anyway, yeah, but putting that aside for a moment.
Yeah.
The articles lay out his plan,
Okay.
and it involves deporting an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants.
11 million.
Yeah, he's calling it the largest deportation effort in American history.
Wow. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
Where would they even begin with something like that?
I mean, logistically,
Yeah.
it would be a massive undertaking.
Right.
I mean, just think about rounding up, detaining,
Yeah.
and transporting millions of people.
It's mind-boggling.
It would require a ton of resources
Yeah.
and manpower.
I could see how some people might think the military is the only way to do it.
I can see that.
But isn't it illegal to use the military for domestic law enforcement?
You're right. There's a law
Like I thought.
called the Posse Comitatus Act,
Right.
and it prohibits using the military for things like this.
Okay, so how are they even considering this then?
Well, they're pointing to a law called the Insurrection Act.
The Insurrection Act.
Yeah, it dates back to 1807.
They're trying to use a law from 1807
It seems like a stretch, right?
to justify deportations in the 21st century.
Yeah, and the ACLU agrees.
Okay.
They're already saying that using the military this way would be patently unlawful.
Okay.
They're pointing out that we already have an agency for immigration enforcement.
Right.
I see.
I see. Yeah.
Exactly.
So what does this Insurrection Act actually say?
So basically, it lets the president deploy the military domestically,
Okay.
but only under specific circumstances.
Like what?
Like if there's a rebellion,
Uh-huh.
or if it's impossible to enforce federal law through the usual channels.
Okay.
So they're arguing that the scale of undocumented immigration
Right.
makes it impossible to enforce the law through the normal means.
So they're saying they need the military because regular law enforcement can't handle it.
Yeah,
But then the ACLU is saying, well, isn't that what ICE's for?
exactly. And some legal experts are saying that using the Insurrection Act like this,
Okay.
especially if it's seen as bad faith,
Uh-huh.
could be challenged in court.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this whole deportation plan seems legally questionable at best.
It does.
But let's talk about the practical side of things.
Okay.
Don't they already have military at the border?
Yeah, there are currently about 4,000 service members,
Okay.
mostly National Guard, who are authorized to support Customs and Border Protection.
So what are they actually doing there?
So their roles are usually more about support than direct enforcement.
Okay.
Things like operating surveillance aircraft,
Okay.
transporting Border Patrol personnel, laying concertina wire,
Uh-huh.
maintaining vehicles.
So basically they're backup for the Border Patrol.
Yeah, you could say that.
But it sounds like Trump's team wants them to do more.
They do.
Like, what have they said about that?
So Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, has talked about using the military for transporting detainees,
Uh-huh.
potentially on military planes,
Wow.
and setting up temporary detention
What
facilities.
kind of detention facility?
They're calling them soft-sided.
What does that mean?
Basically tent camps.
Using military planes for deportations in tent camps?
Yes. It's,
It doesn't sound good.
yeah, it raises a lot of questions
That's
about how far we're willing to go to enforce immigration laws.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so this plan is legally dubious,
Yeah.
ethically problematic,
Uh-huh.
and logistically, it just sounds like a nightmare.
It does.
But before we get into all that,
Okay.
let's go back to the National Guard for a second.
Okay.
They're not the regular army,
All
right?
right.
Right?
Yeah.
So couldn't the states just refuse to let Trump use them?
That's a good point.
for deportations?
The National Guard has a unique role here.
Okay.
Unlike the active duty military,
Right.
they usually fall under the control of individual states.
So wouldn't that make it difficult for Trump to just deploy them?
It
Or
could.
something like mass deportations?
Especially if the governors are opposed to the idea.
Exactly.
But the president does have the power to federalize the National Guard.
What does that mean?
It basically brings them under his direct command.
So he could override the states
In a sense.
and then take control of the National Guard.
Right.
But when he does that,
Yeah.
does that Posse Comitatus Act still apply?
That's the interesting part.
Okay.
When the National Guard is federalized,
Uh-huh.
the Posse Comitatus Act doesn't apply to them anymore.
So he could use them for deportations without violating that law.
It seems that that's the strategy they're exploring.
Wow, so they've really thought this through.
It seems so.
They're looking for all the loopholes
Yeah.
to make this happen.
But remember, there are still legal experts
Right.
who believe this would be unlawful.
Yeah.
And it would definitely lead to court challenges.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
So even if they can do it legally, there are still a lot of other things to consider,
Absolutely.
like ethical concerns
Definitely.
and financial implications.
We haven't even touched on the cost of all this.
Right. I can't imagine it would be cheap.
And that's something we'll talk about more as we continue.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how this plan is legally questionable
Right.
and ethically problematic.
Yeah.
And logistically, it seems almost impossible.
It'd be a huge challenge.
11 million people.
Yeah.
It's hard to even wrap my head around that.
I know what you mean.
Even if they could figure out the legal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and even if they could find the resources,
Right.
just the scale of it is mind-boggling.
It's massive.
Where would they even start?
Well, the first thing they'd have to do is find all 11 million people.
Right, because they're not all just like
Exactly.
in one place.
They're not all in detention centers or anything.
Right, they've been living here for years.
Many of them for years.
They
Yeah.
have homes and jobs.
Exactly.
Family.
It's not like they're all just waiting to be rounded up.
Right, they're part of communities all over the country.
Exactly. And then think about the next step.
What's that?
Apprehending them.
Right.
You would need a huge force just to detain that many people.
And then where would you put them?
Exactly.
You'd need to build a ton of new detention facilities.
You would need massive facilities.
Like, I guess that's where the tent camps come in?
Yeah, the soft-sided facilities.
But even then,
Right.
just taking care of that many people,
The logistics would be unbelievable.
feeding them, housing them,
Providing medical care,
and the cost.
it would be incredibly expensive.
Not to mention all the legal stuff.
Oh, right.
Wouldn't each person have the right to due process?
Of course.
To have their case heard?
Absolutely. They'd be entitled to that under the law.
So you'd need lawyers and judges
Thousands of them.
and courtrooms.
And support staff.
It's overwhelming just thinking about it.
It really is.
It's not just rounding people up and putting them on buses.
Right. It's so much more complicated than that.
It's like a logistical nightmare.
A nightmare on a scale we've never seen before.
And we haven't even talked about how much this would all cost.
That's right.
Did the articles mention any numbers?
They did.
Okay.
They cited a report that said deporting 1 million people per year
Okay.
could cost $88 billion.
Wait, $88 billion per year?
On average. Yeah.
That's more than some entire federal agencies.
It's an insane amount of money.
And that's just for 1 million people.
Right.
They want to deport 11 million.
Imagine the total cost.
It would be trillions of dollars.
Over a decade, most likely.
Trillions.
It's hard to even fathom.
And where's that money going to come from?
Right.
It's not like we have a deportation fund just sitting around.
Exactly. It would probably mean cuts to other programs.
Right.
Higher taxes.
Or more debt.
Most likely all of the above.
And that's assuming we even have the resources to do it.
Yeah, that's another big question.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we've got this plan that's legally questionable, ethically a disaster, logistically impossible,
Pretty much.
and financially would bankrupt us.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we've missed?
Well, we've talked about the ethical concerns,
Yeah.
but I think we need to go a little deeper
Into what?
into the human cost of all of this. I
Okay.
mean, these aren't just numbers. We're
Right.
talking about real people.
Real people with real lives.
Exactly.
It's easy to forget that when we're talking about millions.
It is.
But each one of those 11 million is a person
With a story.
with a family.
With hopes and dreams.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal arguments
Yeah.
and the logistics.
And forget about the human beings involved.
Exactly.
We were talking earlier about apprehending people
Right.
and detaining them.
Yeah.
It sounds so cold.
Impersonal.
These are people with fears and anxieties.
Just like us.
Exactly.
So how do we move beyond the statistics?
I think we need to hear from those people.
Undocumented immigrants.
Yes. their stories.
You think that would help people understand
I do.
what they're going through?
It's harder to demonize someone when you see them as a person,
As a mother or a father,
as a friend or a neighbor.
I'm still a little pessimistic.
I understand.
It just seems so huge.
It is a huge issue.
Like, does my voice even matter?
Their voice absolutely matters.
Really?
Don't underestimate the power of individual voices.
But one person can't change this.
One person alone, maybe not. But when we raise our voices together, things can change.
Politicians pay attention.
They do when their constituents speak up.
And change happens.
When enough people demand it.
But this isn't just about politics.
You're right. It's bigger than that.
It's about our values.
It's about what kind of country we want to be.
Exactly.
So if you're worried about this plan,
Yeah.
if you think it's wrong, don't stay silent.
Speak up.
Let your voice be heard.
How?
Contact your elected officials.
Okay.
Write letters to the editor. Join protests.
Okay.
Support organizations that are fighting for what's right.
So every action matters.
Every action matters.
Even the small ones.
Especially when we all act together.
I needed to hear that.
We all do sometimes.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.